So we'll kind of look at the sequence of scouting maneuvers that I go for to find out what type of unit composition they're going to be building, and then once you identify that it's air, what do you make to counter that when they entrench themselves with cannons and a bunch of really expensive units. So the opening scenario doesn't really matter too much. They delayed my natural, I just went pool and then hatch, and then I took a gas. It is worth taking a moment to note the response to this opening build. So Protoss went for gate and then another gate in cyber at the same time, and then an expansion. Normally against Protoss, I would go for a third base at about 3 minutes. In this case, I'm not concerned about getting to the 3 base stage because my opponent isn't even in the 2 base economy stage. They're just now starting their natural. So instead of taking that third hatch, I'm opting for another queen, and in the production tab I have 2 lings, and then I'll go for another 8 lings up to 10. So the queens are a sort of zoning tool. The lings do their best. Part of the annoyance of this build is the adepts arrive long before ling speed, so you can't really reliably surround them, unless they make a big mistake. But now I'm spreading creep with my extra queen, taking that third base, and then droning up with ling speed and overlord speed, both of which are sort of scouting tools. Lings go out across the map. This overlord is giving me vision of these gases. This overlord is going in to scout what their main looks like. So we see a void ray. That's a little bit strange as an opener. Typically if someone wanted to deny overlords, they would go for a phoenix, but this void ray builds nicely into a turtle Skytoss army of void ray, carrier, and that sort of thing. And it accomplishes a similar duty of chasing down overlords. So I have a ling here for vision to see if they move out, and then I'm going to be very persistent about continuing to scout. A lot of times the opponent will invest in something to remove your scouting, like this void ray is trying to get rid of my lings and overlords and whatnot, so I just have to keep pressuring them with scouting, keep sending in overlords. It's worth sacrificing a few overlords and a few lings to know exactly how many workers they have and what their unit composition is building into. So let's look at my vision, so we don't kind of overestimate the scouting I've gotten. I know they have 2 gases here and a third base, so this looks like it's not going to be a bunch of adepts with an all-in. And then this is probably the most important read that tells us that the opponent is going to be playing hyper defensive into what they hope to be a really, really good composition. Oftentimes when players will scout defensive pieces or air units like void rays, they'll think, oh, I want to attack before they get a huge army. But you can also think of it in terms of a slow-moving, luxurious army with lots of defense gives you the freedom to drone your 4th base really quickly. So my reaction here, make a few more lings just to be safe in case they did shade like 5 adepts across or something. But then getting into Hydra Den, Spire, Macro Hatch, adding a gas, saturating this base, saturating the 4th base, the natural is saturated, bane speed is going in case they went for like air units and a bunch of adepts. So basically you get into an arms race of tech. Try and produce as much as you can. Get the infestation pit, get the spire, get a second evo, get a macro hatch, make some hydras. Hydras are a really nice center unit that will complement your hive tech units. So once you get into ultra or broodlord, hydra is a really good complement to those. So we see here quite a few oracles. I'm going to use my queens and my hydras to try and deflect that. I did invest in 2 spores per base because I saw they had a couple void rays early on, and that buys me a little bit of time to get the queens and hydras in place to defend. I'm taking 1 air upgrade, might as well. They're giving us the map, so spread creep and tech up as hard as possible. I'm taking burrow. Burrow is a nice, annoying piece that will tell you exactly when the opponent expands and force them to invest in some protection before they take a base. So I have 1 ling at this potential base, 1 ling at this potential base. I need to place 1 here, there's 1 here, 1 here. So as soon as burrow is done, I'll burrow 1 ling per base, and they'll have to put either an oracle a cannon or an observer over that location before they can expand there. Not the most amazing Oracle control of all time, but they did attempt to get some damage in. I'm up to 85 drones. One thing that's totally fine to do, especially against a turtling opponent, is hit a really high worker count like that with a plan to convert those workers into spores. In the most hyper-defensive Protoss scenarios, you won't necessarily be able to break the opponent with a maxed out army. So one thing you could do to supplement your anti-air firepower is put a lot of spores near the area where you're pushing into the Protoss. Spores are actually quite high DPS against air. So as you reach that sort of goal of getting your maxed out army composition, make a bunch of spores with a base of drones and then redrone those losses. One thing that is pretty noteworthy is figuring out how many workers per army you have. They added this new feature in Legacy of the Void, I think in the most recent patch, where you can see your ratio of army to workers. So when you're approaching 200 supply, you know kind of your balance between how much economy you're bringing in versus how much army you have on the map at a given time. So in this case, I have more workers than the opponent, which means I have less supply for army. It also means that I have a better ability to reproduce my army after I trade it out. So this is the composition I'm going for against a carrier-based Skytoss player. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but you build a couple ultras. The reason you build 2 ultras, maybe 1 to 3 would be the range, is the interceptors from the carriers deal little damage to them because it's kind of divided across all the shots against the ultra armor. So if you get that chitinous plating and you have a decent armor upgrade, like I'm going for +2 armor here, the ultras are kind of the tank for your Queen Hydra Corruptor max out that you're going for. Infestors bring fungal to the table, and if you see they're turtling, you might as well take Neuro Parasite. Protoss units are good, Adro taught us this, so if you can take control of those, they become part of your army. You can also think about the amount of supply that a Protoss unit takes up, like a carrier or a Void Ray, and if you Neuro Parasite a unit for a brief window during the main fight, you're basically subtracting that army value from their side and adding it to your side. So you're tipping the balance with each infestor, which is pretty nice. One mistake that I made in this engagement we'll see is this ramp is fairly narrow, and sometimes you can have a bit of a traffic jam. So once I get to 200 supply, we'll kind of look at how the engagement is set up and also what I could have done better. A good thing to check in with is the number of the different units that are going to be in this composition. So this is 73 workers, 2 ultras, 6 hydras, 10 infestors, and 19 queens. Queens, sort of like the infestor energy, you can count their energy as potentially ultra HP or queen HP. It's pretty much units that are an APM cost, where you have to cast the transfuse spell on a friendly unit to get value from that, but it does sort of act like you're adding on to your 200 supply by virtue of being able to heal your units so many times. In addition, the queens are just very sturdy, they have a lot of HP, they have decent armor, and they put out some damage. It's not super high damage. I have this ring of spores kind of as an anchor. Whenever the fight starts, actually that's a good thing to note, Hydras with range can hit these traps before they detonate if you have vision of them. So I just had this spore in range, and then the Hydras can go knock those out so you don't get a big part of your army frozen. So I'm moving some spores down, making sure the ultras are in the front, and then I'm kind of moving into this Protoss formation. So a couple relationships here. Cannons are pretty poor as late game units. They do act as a sort of buffer for the Protoss army, but as you can see here, they do almost nothing to ultras with armor. 6 armor with the chitinous and +2, and then I have a bunch of Queen Hydra going down. Something I could have done that would have improved my ability to take this engagement, if you have like perfect formation, I could put 1 ultra and about half my Queen Hydra over here, one Ultra and half my Queen Hydra coming down this ramp, and probably the Infestors coming down this ramp as well. You'll see here there's a big part of my army that is not participating, but the composition is basically good against what they have. So I'm transfusing Queens here, and Ultras. Whatever I can, pretty much. One thing you can focus on is looking at units on your front line and just spamming transfuse on those. The strength of Zerg against Protoss and, to a lesser extent, Terran is not the power of their units and the value and strength of their units, but in their production and their ability to remax quickly. So I'm making 16 Corruptors, taking an armor upgrade behind this. The opponent is making Void Rays, which that's cool, but it's going to be rebuilding their army at a slower rate than Zerg. So I'm transfusing, I'm making Corruptors, a little bit stuck. Fungal growth on the groups of Interceptors that are on your army is really nice for pinning those down and dealing a lot of splash damage. I tried to use their Mothership Core and overcharge a pylon, but I think that would only work if it was your pylon. So just grabbing a few units here or there with the Neuro Parasite. Once the Interceptor count is low, Fungal doesn't really do much, so you might as well claim a unit. I accidentally grabbed the Probe here. But in addition to these Corruptors, I'm also building Lings. Lings are a unit that are made so fast and run so fast that they can actually join the engagement before the fight is necessarily over. So the opponent leaves the game, but if they were to stick around and wait for their next cycle of Void Ray or something, the Lings could be right on this front line really quickly. So that's a sort of basic guide to confronting a turtling Skytoss player without the 2-2 Queen Hydra timing.